Lots of stratocumulus rolling in with bases at 3,500. This is a shallow cold air advection pattern, and we can see that here on the sounding. This corresponds to the footage that you see out there in that opening footage. And there's that very well-defined inversion. And what we're seeing here is basically just cold air originating from the northern U.S. sliding underneath this tropical air, which has not really changed much. So we end up with kind of a capped air mass. And if we look at those clouds, you can see the convective elements, like right there. And then above it, you can see kind of a stratiform layer where the clouds have spread out. You can especially see it right there. So this is the WMO Cloud Atlas website, and they talk about low cloud number 4, stratocumulus cumulogenitus, and that's formed by the spreading of cumulus, and there's a more dramatic example there. There's a look at conditions across the southwestern U.S. early this evening. Not much going on. We do see the lee side trough getting reestablished right there in Colorado. Pretty quiet conditions across the southwest. We've got a little bit of a Pacific high pushing some cool, moist air into the San Joaquin Valley. You can see the northwesterly flow at some of those places, and then over into Texas. High pressure due to the recent incursion of cold air southward. Kind of a very cool day. You can see the north winds, places like Austin and San Antonio there, and Houston. It's currently looking like this in the southeastern U.S., baroclinic system there in Georgia. Cold front is kind of holding back there, just passing through the Pensacola area and offshore with Louisiana. We've got a couple of well-defined squall lines in the Carolinas and southern Georgia. And this runs things back to about 3 in the morning. Pretty good MCS there in the Memphis and western Mississippi area. And you can see it move eastward through the morning hours and into the afternoon. And currently, squall line is about right there. Southern Georgia coming into the Tallahassee area and Savannah. And there's SPC's convective outlook. Slight risk there with a tornado watch box. Those watches are covering both of those squall lines. And we can see that those storms have already produced some tornadoes in southern Alabama. They're pointing to veered low-level flow being the limited factor, which means that there's less shear in the lower levels from 0 through 1 kilometers, which is the critical layer there. However, with a well-developed squall line like this, there's always the potential to get rotating storms along the leading edge. And there's the radar there from Tallahassee. Looks like, certainly looks worse on composite reflectivity than it does from a single radar site, but we do see the discrete nature of those cells, so that would concern me a little bit. Looking at the velocity, not much going on except for this one little couplet right there. You can see that's showing some outbound right there and some inbound. So that's some rotation. I'm going to put a little dot right there. We come back to the reflectivity and we can see that that is embedded in that cell. And that kind of makes a lot of these tornadoes they get in the southeast U.S. dangerous. They tend to be rain-wrapped, and a lot of times people are actually looking for them out the window, but tornadoes like this will be right on you before you know what's coming. And there's an extreme close-up. Let me bring up you can see in the very bottom there. Maximum outbound, 45 knots. Max inbound, about 22 knots. So that's about 60 to 70 knots of shear, and you can see it's kind of a broad area of shear. So the diameter on that rotational couplet, about 3 miles. And for tornado activity, we'd like to see that down below about 1.5 miles in general. This cell here also has some potential. This is going to be, there's some of the city names near that one cell. I'm not too familiar with Florida, really. And then that other cell that's further north. Let me put a little dot right there in the center of that rotation. And yeah, it's going to be somewhere between Shady Grove and, I guess, Lee, wherever that is. Anyway, there you go. That's how it looks. The northeast U.S. under very persistent northerly flow, and we've seen this for about 10 days now. And the cause of that, well, we just go a little bit further north, and it looks like there's a big low parked over Newfoundland, way up here at the top. Up near the top there, I can see maybe a 1036 millibar isobar. So this is quite broad. As a result, we see all this cold air extending over the northeastern U.S. And there's really no fronts mixed in here to look at. And the Pacific Northwest getting a little more active. There comes another burst of cold air coming out of Alberta and Saskatchewan. Temperatures are below 20 and in some cases below 10. There comes another blast of cold air, even though it's almost April. And it looks like the leading edge of that blast of cold air extends all the way back to the Canadian Rockies and actually all the way back to the coastal range there in British Columbia. And out west of there on the Washington coast, we've got that westerly flow all set up, and that's bringing in some of that humid air from the Pacific. And then looking at the upper air charts, we've got kind of a very noisy pattern. Lots of vortices across North America and all different places there. The main polar front jet stream is coming across the North Pacific into the west coast and then down into the southeast U.S. like that. And then we've got a couple of weaker segments. One is to the south. This is probably partly a subtropical jet down there. And then up to the north, way up there, we've got a separate stream up there in the Canadian High Arctic and north of Alaska. A couple of jet maxes. One is on the west coast right there, coming into Oregon, and the other one is out over Georgia, supporting that frontal system that's down in that area. And then looking ahead at the next few days, we'll just kind of scroll that forward. We can see that trough in the western U.S. digs down into Nevada and Utah. And it looks like by the weekend, that should be affecting mostly the north-central U.S. Looks fairly quiet most elsewhere around the U.S., but there's another very sharp trough coming onto the California coast. Looks like more rain for Northern California over the weekend. And then yet another trough. This is a pretty good jet max digging southward, and that's going to end up in California. There it is. Monday and Tuesday comes right in there like a bowling ball. And then we see the southwest flow start to get set up in the western half of the U.S. That means pressure and height falls across the Rockies and destabilizing conditions. Now, we are warming up since it's getting into April, so I would expect this to be associated with an increase in the chance of severe weather from Texas on up towards Colorado and Kansas. Yep, there it is. And then we get the final approach of that short wave around midweek next week. And that'll affect the Amarillo, Colorado, and Kansas area. And then just a quick look ahead after that. Another wave coming down. So it looks wet everywhere from the Mississippi River west to the Pacific. Very stormy pattern here coming up for at least the first half of April. Then it looks like towards the end a bit of ridging gets set up, but that's pretty far out there. However, you can see that channel of cold air continuing to send polar air southward. So we are going to have a lot of weather to look at over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Now, I would probably amend my surface analysis because I can see out there in Oregon there's kind of this packing of thickness lines. And we know that there's a jet stream coming right over that area. So I think there's some baroclinicity anywhere from Reno and Redding north to Portland, somewhere in that band. So now I'm thinking something along the lines of this. A baroclinic system in eastern Oregon into Idaho with a cold front extending southward, and I think the data kind of matches up. This looks pretty good. You can see the upper 60s there in the San Joaquin Valley, and then you go north and we get into lots of 40s and that humid Pacific air coming inland. All right, so here's our Microsoft Paint surface analysis. You can see that big high there in Quebec extending all the way down into Texas. That's pretty much the bulk of the cold air that's in the eastern U.S. And then new cold air coming down from Alberta, and I'm putting that Canadian polar symbol there in that region. And then we got the Pacific system coming inland, so I'm putting maritime polar for that. And that's on its way eastward, and I would expect these to kind of consolidate into one system. So quick look tomorrow morning. Cold front sinking south through Utah, Wyoming, and the main system pushing into the Dakotas. There's that big 1030, 1040 millibar high coming in. The Georgia system is going offshore as a squall line, and finally Florida gets some cool weather moving in. They've had lots of mid-80s and 90s, and that should change pretty significantly. And that ridge that we talked about in the eastern U.S., I don't know if you can see it in those isobars, but there it is extending all the way down into Texas. So it should be a cool night tonight, all the way from the Great Lakes down to Louisiana. Here's the analysis for tomorrow night. That Pacific system continues making headway into the Pacific Northwest. That's being driven by this massive 1040 millibar high that's off the top left of the chart. Also a massive high across Newfoundland, helping to push a lot of cold air southward, and that ridge is still in place over the eastern U.S., so looks like another cool night coming up for the eastern half of the U.S. And then out off the east coast, there goes our ocean-going system way off the coast of the Carolinas, and then we got that trailing front extending through the Bahamas down to Cuba. And as that front continues sinking south for Thursday morning, looks like we get some snow developing, some very strong upslope in South Dakota and Wyoming. So it looks like another rough day there for Interstate 80. And then in the western U.S., the cold front sinks through Nevada, coming there through Tonopah, Area 51, and Caliente, heading for Vegas, and then looks like that's coming down the San Joaquin Valley also. Then for Thursday night, a little progression there on the system out there in the Dakotas and Nebraska, sinks further south all the way down into Kansas. Now that warm front did kind of lose definition. If you look at the thickness lines, the red and the blue from here to here, I don't see much of a gradient. So it's kind of hard to place that. Now, I probably would use the cross-sections maybe from Weather Nerds, or maybe actually go to the dew point chart. Maybe I can take a quick look at that. Then you can see up here in Manitoba, there's the old occlusion heading north and dying out. Yeah, a lot of times I go to the dew point chart to try to find the front, because I guess down in the southern U.S., that tends to delineate a lot of the air masses, but I had to go to temperature here, and that does kind of put the warm front right there in the Minneapolis area. You can see the rest of it extending there into Colorado, and then it kind of loses definition in the mountains, but it's definitely there. You can see the winds back there from Elko out towards Grand Junction out of the north. So this is actually where I think that frontal placement would be Thursday night. And one thing you can see with that Gulf being wide open, look at the cool temperatures all the way from Austin up to Oklahoma City. So there's a lot of overcast. And it looks like the dry line is set up anywhere from Del Rio all the way up to Woodward. So do we have any potential for storms? Well, we can look at the soundings. I think I just clicked on western Oklahoma there, and what I see is a nuclear cap. That's a strong cap, and the moisture is a little bit on the shallow side. It's less than half a kilometer in depth. That's not very much. Now, assuming we had the moisture all bulked up, let's see how hot we would have to get. 86 degrees Fahrenheit, well, that's certainly attainable. The moisture's on the shallow side, but I think maybe it could be possible to squeak some storms out of this. So we'll just have to see. And then the last frame for Friday night, kind of a slow-moving system there, continues pushing eastward into the Minneapolis area, through Des Moines, and it's starting to nose through the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Starting to get a little upslope flow there in the Texas Panhandle and West Texas, so we should see clouds and maybe even some drizzle in that part of the country. And then on the tail end, front is sinking there through Flagstaff in Vegas, and then we see the winds shift around to the north through that area. Still, the Gulf is open, though. You can see the pressure gradient there, Louisiana and Texas Gulf Coast, and that should continue bringing moisture northward, helping to feed this convection along the front. And then behind the front, looks like that high pressure area has kind of spread out, and the actual values have diminished from 1040, and now they're down to 1025 millibars. So that push of cold air is starting to lose some steam there. All right, that's about all I got for this evening. Thank you once again for watching and supporting the webcast. And again, thanks to our new patrons, David Lumbert, Jeff Erickson, Stephen Dorset, and Keith Frank. Thank you for supporting our stream, and we'll be back at you tomorrow. Thanks. Take care.